every day that goes by, no one is protecting our girls.
If you're identified as a female, you should be able to just play a sport.
The California Interscholastic Federation rules that allow transgender athletes to compete are now being modified. More biological female athletes will now be allowed to participate in this weekend's track and field championships here in California and Clovis. The rule change may be the first attempt nationally by a high school sports governing body to expand competition when trans athletes are participating, and it comes as President Trump threatens to cut federal funding to states that do not comply with his executive order banning trans athletes from women's sports. The president's threat comes as trans athletes or a trans athlete is scheduled to compete in the girls varsity triple jump, high jump, and long jump in the state finals this weekend. To help us unpack the legal and social implications of the debate over transgender athletes, we're joined now by Elana Redfield, Federal Policy Director at the Williams Institute at UCLA. Elana, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's start with this. The president said specifically here, as he threatens to cut federal funding to California, that it's illegal to allow, this is a quote, illegal to allow men to play in women's sports, I guess under Title IX. Can you tell us what the rules really say here in this case?
Sure. So this is the president's interpretation of Title IX. But notably, President Biden did interpret that that statute differently, and many courts have also interpreted differently to be inclusive of transgender people. So the president here is enforcing his own particular interpretation of the law.
So if this is the case and we have this executive order, where do we stand legally in this case? I mean, we have this young lady that's going to be in the track and field competition this weekend down in Clovis. You know, what legally is could happen after this now?
Sure. So the president has many obstacles to enforcement of his interpretation. And as we've seen in the case of the state of Maine, where they attempted to enforce this interpretation quite aggressively, they actually must follow procedural requirements. So the first thing is they have to make sure they're following the procedure, which they did not do with Maine. So we have to wait and see how that's going to play out as they go through the actual steps they're required to enforce. But the other concern here is that this interpretation probably conflicts with a number of laws, including California state laws as well as federal laws such as the Constitution.
Yeah, that is what I wanted to ask you about. So you have the California law, the Maine law as well. They have their own law overseeing it. And then you have this federal law that the president's interpreting in a different way. So which supersedes which here in this point, or is that for a court to decide?
Well, I will say it is for a court to decide ultimately. However, there are reasons in which where the California law here needs to be taken quite seriously. So, for example, California provides for anti-discrimination protections for transgender people, and it also specifically addresses sports participation for high school age students. And so, the way that the federal law is enforced has to take California's own state laws into consideration. The way that the Title IX works is it generally is about federal funding, meaning that states have to agree to the terms of the funding. And when the law is being enforced against the state can't be coerced into adopting a policy. They have to actually freely agree to the conditions of the funding. So that's another issue that's going to have to get sorted out in the courts.
Elana, there have been parents who have been attending the training for this transgender athletes and yelling at her for being part of this. I don't know if people have seen the video online, but can you talk to us a little bit about how many transgender athletes? Do we have a number? I know the Williams Institute has studied this, but do we know how many transgender athletes are practicing in sports in high schools across, or middle schools even across our state?
Well, it's actually very difficult to understand the full number of trans athletes who are participating, partly because we don't have great data collection on who is transgender and who's participating in sports. But we do know there are around 49,000 trans youth who are high school age in California. However, a small number of them are likely participating in sports, particularly at a competitive level. So it is a small number of people, and we rely on anecdotal evidence, and the anecdotal incidences of trans athletes who are really competing at a high level are quite small.
And for those that are saying that these trans athletes are getting a competitive edge, particularly in this particular case with this student, are there any studies that look into whether these trans students have an edge when they play these sports?
Most of the evidence around trans sports participation is quite inconclusive, and very little of it focuses on trans athletes at this kind of level, at a high school level. So it's very difficult to say based on the evidence. What we do know is that more information is needed, and that unfortunately, policies that prohibit trans sports participation really limit our ability to understand the actual experiences of trans athletes.
Yeah, it's important to remember that the information is not, even out there yet. So when we see people going after trans athletes, there's really no conclusive scientific proof just yet, which is what I'm sure researchers are looking into now. Elana Redfield, Federal Policy Director at the Williams Institute at UCLA, thank you for joining us this morning. We appreciate your time.
Thank you again. Take care.